You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Why does our healing often fall apart just when life finally feels safer? Join me for today's episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. We can process our trauma and do all the healing and therapeutic work. Years might pass with us feeling stable and fine until something shifts and suddenly old wounds start to reopen in new ways. Erin Cutrone is a clinical therapist for 20 years turned nervous system and awareness training coach. With a background in yoga, meditation, and flower essences and mental health counseling, she's now a clinical supervisor and mentor for holistic wellness professionals. She's the founder of The Space, a virtual drop-in community wellness model where they are trying to redefine wellness. Erin is also a podcaster and the host of the Align with Love podcast, a solo podcast where she speaks to the how to begin to understand and break down the barriers of the heart, healing, and health so we can learn the how-tos to awaken, ignite, inspire, spread, and align with love for ourselves, for each other, and for our world. She has worked in settings from psychiatric hospitals, with foster youth, in schools, in private practice, and with people across the age spectrum. Combining listening to the subtleties with her study of the physiology of stress, the biology of trauma and attachment, neuroscience, yoga, energetic anatomy, and spirituality, she has come to see through a truly holistic lens. Let's meet Erin Cutrone. Hi, Erin. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because the missing links of healing is a fascinating topic for me. And of course, this is something that I feel our listeners absolutely need to hear. And I'm always happy to have new perspectives and insights on this. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Petra. I'm so excited. I've been really looking forward to this just because I know our works weave really well together, and I won't get heavy on what you do, but there's a lot of pieces that we can share with the listeners. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. My pleasure to have you here today. Would you like to share maybe a little bit about yourself and your journey and your story, maybe the pieces that connect to what you do today, and also share with our listeners what it is that you do today?
Sure. I am a therapist for 20 years, which is insane to me. I'm like, that cannot be, but it is. And I've really turned more nervous system and awareness training as a coach. Just in what I've done for so long, it really is just very simplified how I understand the body and the mind connection. My background was in yoga and meditation, and I work with a more subtle vibrational healing modality called flower essences, which are different than essential oils. So we can touch on that, but it's on the vibrational aspect. And now I am a clinical supervisor and mentor for holistic wellness professionals. And what else? Let's see. How did I get here? I've had my own. If we want to go just a little deep so people can understand, I have a ton of study. I study neuroscience, I study physiology, I study biology of trauma. So I have that aspect, but in my own life with therapy specifically, and especially like we're heavy dominant on the diagnosing and it's here's this thing that you have and that's great. And this is counter. This is why I moved towards the coaching. My colleagues don't love this, but why we have all of this language and yet numbers of mental health issues are increasing to epidemic levels globally. Even in youth, it's getting bigger and bigger. So we can have the label and the diagnosis, but there are pieces missing from the modalities. I'm sure you know this. But in my trauma experience, diagnosed, it would have been CPTSD. It was a very chronic, prolonged, ongoing trauma. And, I went through it, processed it, talked about it, thought I was healed. And then later on in my life, I had this, well, some people might call it like the spiritual awakening aspect or the crumbling, but these like big moments where, and I'd love to share this with the listeners in greater details, but when we get to, sometimes I call it the paradox of safety, meaning we're talking about the nervous system. A lot of this stuff can be very buzzwordy and protocol-y, but when we access more safety, the circuitry, the things that are stored inside of us, even though I have, let's say in my experience, a cerebral understanding of that, my body was still holding that experience. And so when I accessed a greater level of safety in my life, it had to come out. And so I talk a lot about circuitry in my work and in trauma. And my definitions of trauma are very different, maybe than some. It's not these big things necessarily, but it is, yes, that what happens in your body. I call it disconnection from self. Anytime there is a severing from self. So we can get into a lot of context about that. And a lack of support, right? Who do we have to fall on in these spaces? And when we don't have, that's going to be something very different for the body. So if there's that disconnection from self, let's call it wiring and circuitry, when we access safety, we're connecting circuitry. Now there is somewhere for this to go. And so that is what was happening. And nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. I started, whatever is stored is going to come out. Thinking the way of that timeline, acting the way of that timeline. My body was feeling everything. And I was like, what is happening? Now, had I gone to a maybe more traditional therapist, they're going to medicate me up. They're going to put me somewhere. They don't have the understanding of those things that are trying to communicate and seek resolve. So that's like how I work, and we can get into lots of different topics about that, but it really helped me link, okay, we have this study, we have these practices and protocols I'm well versed in, but what was this missing piece? What was happening? And so that's what I'd like to get into today, the missing link.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you touch on such an important piece of that healing journey. And we often arrive at this from all different kind of angles and paths. And as you, maybe some of us have had therapy and have tried all different things. But in the end, I think a lot of people come to the conclusion that something's missing and that whatever healing they have done, there's still that piece missing where they can actually feel safe. They can feel at home in their body. Maybe they have processed the trauma, but it doesn't feel like that at certain times. Such an important piece that you're touching on there that I can certainly relate to. And I'm guessing a lot of our listeners can relate to that as well. Now, share a little bit more about this missing piece that you discovered, because I feel that we're just on the cusp of unfolding that. And I feel there's so much value in actually digging into that a little bit deeper so we can explore that. So feel free to take this wherever you're inspired to take this, and we'll come along and join you.
I didn't want to get too deep in on your intro question. I was like, okay, don't lose sight of the question, because I can talk about this all day. It really is my passion and life's work, but it is purpose. And I think I listen to a lot of podcasts, and they weave it in such a way where it's like a little bit of gatekeeping. It's okay, if you want the rest, like you're going to have to come to me. And I don't believe that to be true. I want people to understand the undercurrents, because I think not just for the individual healing and understanding, but this is the entryway into our collective change. And the connective piece, and I know you do a lot of nervous system specific work, but I really simplify it into those safety systems and danger systems, right? So through that nervous system, really taken it and tried to simplify as much as possible. So this is what you need to know, right? So when the system is in that, even if it's perceived danger, it's going to interpret information very differently. Right. So I take this from, for the listeners, if they're versed in this is like polyvagal theory. And the way I understand the polyvagal theory is like really the science of safety and danger. So when I speak to that, I speak to the still face experiments. So this is something I speak to in a way of, okay, if we're sitting here and I have a very neutral expression on my face, and we manipulate and work with your breath. So I might say, breathe short and shallow, similar to anxiety or panic. I don't know if it'll pick up. Sometimes it doesn't pick up the breath audio. So short and shallow, constricted breath, or like they say, breathing through a straw. That's going to activate your stress system, if the listeners know, the sympathetic system. And from that system, from my very neutral face, you might start to think, oh no, she's upset with me. Something's wrong. What did I do? And your brain starts to go through all of these series of thoughts related to danger cues. So when we're in a danger system, a threat system, we take in only danger cues. If I were to then manipulate that breath with you, and we do bigger breaths and deeper breaths, and we get your system into that parasympathetic state, that safety state, let's say, in the safety state, from the very same expression, I have not changed anything of my still and neutral face. She's so interesting. I wonder if she's a vegetarian. What does she do for fun? What is her life? Right? There's play, there's curiosity, nothing of danger. So from those two systems, when we can have that takeaway, if I don't know I'm in a threat system, I'm taking in possibly incorrect cues. It's neutral. There's no cue whatsoever. So I picture how many of us, with what we are constantly being activated with in our news feeds on all day, every day, right? The sounds, the lighting, the speeds of our 5G is all activating of a survival system in our bodies, right? So if I'm not aware of that, and I do this all the time, when I check in, I'm like, oh, my body's in that. Let me move. I have to train it. This is why I call it nervous system awareness and training, because all of this stuff can be just like a muscle trained when I have that awareness. Right? So I start with that of, okay, what system are you in and how do you know what happens in your body? And so I take that as a first key to understand in nervous system awareness and training is we're taking in very different cues from each state, even if that thing is neutral.
Yeah, that's really fascinating how you describe that. And I'm also wondering if our listeners are thinking right now, oh, I wonder which one I'm in at the moment and whether I'm perceiving things from this kind of threat place, which I feel that permeates far past even just perceiving other people, right? When we're in sympathetic, I feel that everything is perceived that way. Maybe something small happens at work, but it just feels really threatening at that point. Or you snap at your kids and then you're like, oh, what just happened? Because we're just not aware that we are in this kind of activated state. So a fascinating piece to really dig into. And I almost want to say a simple place for us to start becoming aware of what is happening. And awareness, I feel, is, as you said, that first step to actually learning. And before we even make any changes, is becoming aware. So thank you for sharing that. I like how you explain that, and I think make that very easy for our listeners to understand as well. Maybe if they're not familiar with some of the nervous system work or polyvagal theory, to understand what this actually means in our lives when we start paying attention to that. It's really fascinating.
And I find just in a lot of these worlds, it's bigger protocols, more protocols. And I find people are just like, oh, like, especially if you're at capacity, right? Another thing I have to become aware of. But remember, the simplification for me can be what I use as bottom up strategies. So we tap into the body to access. If I say, hold your thought, grab your thought, and this is where I speak a lot to the etymology of psyche. So I'll just like weave into one more little aspect that I find really important. So the etymology of psyche, of psychology, of psychiatry. Most people understand that to be the study of the mind. The etymology of psyche is actually life and breath and soul. How many of the listeners, if they've tapped into any of the psyche veins, include those aspects? So here's another missing link of, okay, we're missing the etymology. So we use breath, so that and the body, to access then those mind states. We can't hold those thoughts. I can't grasp them. I can sense them, I can feel them, but I can't hold them. I also like to say that those thoughts are out of body. That's a disembodied. Again, a lot of my practices are counter to my colleagues, but can you feel your stomach right now? And I'm going to do a little invitation for the listeners. Can you just tap into your stomach and notice, can you relax it at all? And I do this and instruct this all day long. I know it's coming when I do it. And my stomach, its default is contraction. So those states, if our stomach is in contraction, it's not sending signals optimally to the rest of the brain and body, right? So easy access point of not like, how am I moving or what am I, just tap into your stomach. Can you relax your stomach? And when you relax your stomach, on top of that stomach is the diaphragm. And so when you relax it, now you can take that bigger breath. And that can be a signal to start to turn on some of those functionings. So if we're in those two states, going back to the safety state and the danger state, in danger or threat, you don't need to do anything. You need to run, you need to fight, you need to shut down and conserve. That's really it. So in that state, important to know, higher thinking goes offline. Logic, reasoning, decision-making, critical thinking, off. I call it higher heart qualities, love, understanding, forgiveness, compassion, offline. I don't need that, right? Then you have, I call it the central column functioning, the digestion, offline, reproduction, offline, immune system, offline. So we're seeing this, and I know you study, on the medical side too, a little bit of that, right? Or the PhD, or you're more. So what happens in our bodies? Why are we seeing so much of the sickness? Why are we seeing so much autoimmune, right? What is happening? Our bodies are moving chronically in a threat state. So easy access point, check in with your stomach, relax it, take a breath. And then if you can decide, are you in danger, imminent danger, life or death danger? Now you can start to convince it like, oh, all right, body, we're not in that space. It feels like that, or we don't like it, or it's unjust, or it's all of these things are true, but I'm not in life or death danger. I just don't like this.
That's really interesting. As soon as you mentioned tuning into the stomach, my stomach does a little somersault and goes, oh yeah, I can feel the knot.
Yes.
So it's very interesting actually tuning in and just giving it a few breaths and seeing if we can let it decontract and let it just be there and fill that space. And I almost feel like I want it to take a breath on its own and just let go. But what an interesting sensation. And I don't think we tune into our stomach very often unless it's very upset and disrupts our daily lives. So very interesting. I love that. And listeners, I invite you, if you want to, after the episode is done, maybe come back to this point and tune back into your stomach. Take a few minutes and see what happens for you when you do this. And I feel that, as you said, is already very telling of what kind of state we might be in, is just on how our stomach feels.
Isn't that amazing? And because these systems are bidirectional, we can work with the mind again, but it's very hard to catch those thoughts and they move very quickly. When we work with the body first, that tangible, I can feel when my stomach is in a knot. The instruction is often 40 times a day, just check in with that stomach. 90 times a day. How many breaths are we taking? So we work with the breath and that stomach and the body to then access the mind. It just becomes a way of signaling to that body of, okay, we're not in danger. And that's why I like to just always preface this work with that paradox of safety, though, too. If our bodies are not familiar with safety, if there is stored emotion, stored experiences in that body, That is very scary. So these mechanisms, I call them, are conscious. They're like, we don't really want to do that. Come back over here. A lot of times I say the symptoms get louder before they get quieter. And that's where we work with understanding the symptoms before we mute them, right? I need to know more information. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I see so many people and they're like, oh, but this is getting louder. And oh, but this is, so I'm going to go to this person. And it's, wait a minute. If you can bear it for, let's give it a month, give me 1 month. If you are not in significant distress, and as soon as we start to invite those symptoms in because they're trying to communicate something that either really did happen, something that is trying to seek resolve, sometimes it's a misinterpretation, right? A lot of these things, when we're working with the nervous system, when I was 2 or 7 or 14 or in utero, I still have that nervous system. And that nervous system does not know time. It's communicating, hey, remember that thing, or don't do that because this thing really did happen. I have to teach it. Oh, yes, I remember that. And here I have a different skill set. And here I can do a little bit more. I know you don't know that, body. So we we communicate, we get very intimate with these parts. I've not seen anybody really invite these things in. So as soon as I let it be here, like a child that's mom, or excuse me, as soon as you look at them, it stops. They don't even have to tell you anything. They just want you to look at them. Same with our symptoms. They're trying to communicate. And if we let them be here, they will often be like, okay, thank you. Finally.
Yeah, so true. And I'm curious, Erin, when you work with clients or even in your own healing work, have you found that sometimes people become actually very disconnected when they've experienced a lot of stress or a lot of trauma? That when we're asking them to tune into the body, some people, and that was me some time ago as well, I couldn't tell what was going on in my body. I couldn't sometimes even tell hunger signals. I couldn't tell when I was thirsty, those bodily sensations. I got completely disconnected from. Have you come across that? And what is your perspective on what that means for people?
Totally. And that's, again, that disconnection from self, as trauma as I know it. And those are the cues we start to tune into more than what is it that you need in the world from these people? Are you hungry? Let's start to tune into that sensation. And a lot of that can be whether it's that functional freeze state or that threat state. We don't need hunger. If I can tune into relaxing that stomach, and that is a signal of that system turning on, those digestive juices are going to start to flow. You might hear that stomach gurgling. You might take that bigger breath, that spontaneous breath. First, before we even dive into what it means or where it comes from or how long you've been holding it or not doing it or not connected, is just without judgment. This is another aspect that I bring into the missing links is I pull from 2 different works that are really potent in when I started this, it was just intuitive of this is important. And now there's science and study behind it. Or actually at that time, the 2 people that I pull from, they were doing this work. I just hadn't found them. This is the work of Masaru Emoto. If your listeners don't know, this is gold. He was a Japanese researcher. He was studying water and the way that water responded to vibration. He would take a microscope with a camera, and at a certain point, as water started to freeze, he would take photographs of it. But before he did that, he was exposing it to different spoken words and written words and imagery and even prayer and intention. And what he was finding over and over again was that the water that was exposed to words such as, I love you, you're cute, let's do this collaboratively, thank you, were these really well-defined, intricate, very complex snowflakes or crystalline structures. And the water that was exposed to, I hate you, you're so dumb, you fool, or it was ignored, would just start to disintegrate almost. There was no structure to that water. And he found this over and over again. Without knowing anything, we are changing. If that is happening to water outside of us, we are majority water. We have a lot of water inside. On a compositional level, when we use language in different contexts, it's affecting us. And this is pulled from like muscle testing works with this, like the body's intuitions or applied kinesiology, that when I use words that are a little more positive, uplifting, constructive, collaborative, I'm stronger internally. We work with posture. Notice what your posture is doing. When I say like, oh, you look so beautiful today, you're like, ooh, and you stand up tall and you open your heart. And then when I say, ooh, you're going to wear that, it's like, we're going to wrap, we're going to hold, we're going to hide. That is a huge piece of tuning into language that we use. And the second part of who I use often is the work of David Hawkins. He does the scale of consciousness. I call it frequency of emotions because he really pairs frequency with different emotional states. And again, when I say bringing in these symptoms and our patterns and the shadow, we can call it whatever we want, those parts we want to hide, we're not so proud of. What often happens with that is there's a bit of shame, or I hear a lot about guilt. Oh, if I would have found this so long ago, life wasted. So when we pair that with his work in understanding frequency of emotions, and this is why I use words like it's not good or bad, it's not positive or negative. I call it more or less personal power. Right? So when we're talking about emotions, if you feel shame around something, do you feel like you have more or less personal power? And now, if I can tune into that, it's like, okay, so if we let these things be here, do I have to feel shame about it? No, that just ups my personal power. And with the work of David Hawkins, what I find so fascinating, so he has this big scale. At the very bottom of that scale is shame and guilt. So shame will come in at 20 and guilt at 30 on this big scale of emotions. So I'm going to give your listeners like my little gems here. Because again, I don't want to gatekeep this. I think that the more people that understand this and can practice this, it's going to change their bodies. It's going to change how they interpret the world. It's going to change their circles, their wellness. It is our entry point to collective change. So on his scale, where that starts to tip, so I call it more or less power. It could be constructive or destructive, but I like more or less power. At 200 is where is like the midline. That's where it starts to tip, but you're just at the midline. And that's at courage. Courage to look at it, courage to let it be here, courage to try something different, courage to have the conversation, whatever that is. So when you access courage, you're at the midpoint. What's even more important? Above that, so you're in your personal power when you hit neutrality. Neutrality comes in at 250. So if we can not necessarily label it as good or bad, or it means it is just neutral. It's just a thing that is happening, a moment, a feeling, a sensation. Neutrality is where you access personal power. That's a game changer for me.
Yeah, I agree. Wow. This is powerful, and also I feel empowering for our listeners because I feel throughout our days, our emotions are often things that pop in without us really consciously maybe thinking about it, working on it, or even trying to generate emotions. They just come in, they generate a feeling, which then affects our thoughts and kind of continues from there, makes a response in the body. These emotions, we're seldomly aware that they do carry frequencies that affect our bodies as well. And that, of course, as you explained, is a really important thing to become aware of, because where we spend most of our time in these emotions throughout the day, of course, will affect how we think, how we behave, also how our body feels and what goes on in our body. A huge piece that links together a lot of the things that we have spoken about actually is this part of the frequency of the emotions. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, our listeners can also look this up online if they're curious and they want to know more about that. They can find some more information online. But yeah, so important to add that piece into our healing journey as well.
And it's interesting when we get into those language aspects, I will often instruct people. We typically don't have the same language for ourselves that we do for other people. I'll say, okay, well, can you externalize that experience, that feeling, that whatever is happening. And maybe you're talking to a child, maybe you're talking to your friend. So can you externalize that language first and then internalize, right? We can't resource things we don't have, but I find we usually have it for the people we care about. We usually have it for especially young children. Like, I'm not going to be like, get out there and do it, you dumb, da, da, da. Right? It's like, but we do that to ourselves over and over again. It's like, we are not the exception. Like, if I could leave the listeners with anything, like, we are not the exception to the rules and treatment we give other people. If we can include ourselves, that's a beautiful practice. Like, okay, I can do that for me too.
I feel that one's a bit of a game changer. The part of, I always want to say self-compassion or self-kindness, as you said, we often treat ourselves way worse than we treat anyone else. And those thoughts circle almost all day long as we're going through our day. So absolutely, if we extend ourselves some of that loving kindness that we would give to others, that already, it would be kind of neat right now for listeners to maybe do that and actually feel how that feels in their bodies if they say something negative about themselves in whatever situation they're in, and then shift that, reframe that, and say something positive. For me, that makes an actual physical difference in my body. And when I say negative things, as you said, I shrink, I contract, I feel that the world is dangerous, I feel that things are not safe. And when I say something loving and kind and supportive, I can take a deeper breath. It feels like things open up and I become more open to the world. So that difference, I think it's a complete game changer that you just brought that up. So thank you for sharing that little nugget, the gold nugget with our listeners.
And I'd say too, for the listeners, if they're having trouble with internalizing that language, start with relaxing that stomach. Right? Because that's going to send signals to the brain differently, like that, okay, we can access some of those higher heart qualities, that higher, I call it higher human functioning. When we can get into safety, we actually can access so much more internally. That would be my access point there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And if our listeners are curious at this point and they would like to know more or work with you or connect with you, what do you have available for programs, services, resources? What can you share with our listeners and how can they connect with you, Erin?
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I have this information I share. Actually, so my fear system would kick on with public speaking. So my podcast journey has been to overcome some of my own internal stuff. I have a podcast, the Align with Love podcast, that they can get some of this information there. If they wanted to work with me personally, my program is Empowered Mental Health, and I do it IN because it's you in power. And then I just started, and I created this for your listeners. I'm sharing my work on a drop-in sort of wellness model that we're virtual right now. So it's a way I can teach you wherever you are in the world to learn some of the foundations of the nervous system training. If you want to just touch on it before you do a deep dive, that is called The Space. And I created a little code for your listeners. If they use code Jōrni, that will give them a discount off of their first class. And that would be a great way to find me. And I'm sure we can link any of that access to me. And I love connecting. I love teaching this work. Like I said, I am not trying to gatekeep this. I want you all to have and know and understand it's going to change our world. It's going to change your world, but it's going to change our world. So this has been such a gift. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing those resources. We, of course, will be linking to all of your offerings in the show notes as well. And I just want to add here for listeners, for the code that you can use, it's JORNI. I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Because some people will put the word journey and then it won't work. So
True,
JORNI for you guys if you want to try that out. And yes, we will link to that to make sure you can find Erin online and all of her offerings. And thank you for this kindness and generosity that you're extending to our listeners. I feel this is a perfect point for them to actually get familiar with some of this work that you're doing and dip their toes in, see how that feels for them, and then continue on their healing journey in whatever direction comes from that. So thank you for offering that. And I just want to thank you, Erin, for being here today and sharing your wisdom with our listeners and with me. And thank you for this beautiful work that you're putting out in the world, because yes, this not only changes the lives of the people it touches, but really our well-being as a collective. And I feel that's what it's all about as well at the foundational level.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been such a gift to share. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was my absolute pleasure. And I look forward to hearing this episode air. I feel there's so much valuable information for our listeners in there. And everyone, thank you for tuning in today. Take really great care of yourselves and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.